So you are then be vigilant about self-image arising, self-esteem, self-worth. Now, on the conventional level, self-esteem or self-worth are derived from the way in which you relate to society that you live in. To a large extent, certain things that you may have achieved or that you may possess, or in some traditional cultures, your sense of self-worth is to do with your ancestors. Not so much in the Western world, and certainly much less in so-called new countries like United States or Australia or Canada. In the new countries, your ancestors are not that important for as far as your sense of identity is concerned. But in older cultures, your sense of identity and sense of self-worth is sometimes to a large extent derived from your ancestors. And even if you have achieved nothing, and you can have a high sense of self-worth because your great-grandfather and the ones before and before and before and before, they have achieved great things in the eyes of the world. Perhaps it means they just killed more people than anybody else. And finally they became, the king gave them a title of nobility, and suddenly they became a duke. And you have pictures of your ancestors on the walls. True self-worth comes from a deeper place that is actually not related to achievement in this world, or whatever this world calls achievement, because that is delusion also. What is it that makes a successful life? Now, the world has a certain opinion about that. The mainstream culture. But that is a delusion too, because most humans who are considered highly successful are also unhappy. Burdened with a huge ego in many cases, making themselves and others unhappy in the process. True self-worth comes from that place of beingness. It comes from the I am. And it is not comparative. On the horizontal dimension in this world, your self-worth is always there. You need comparison. And to have a heightened sense of self-worth, you need to be better in some ways than others. You compare yourself to others, and that determines your sense of self-worth. Possessions, looks, knowledge, skills, all these things that you have, things that you can do, things that you know. Self-worth could be about all your knowledge in your mind that you have accumulated. So do you derive your self-worth from those things? And but it relies on comparison. Compared to others, one person says, I look much better. I look better. Not me, obviously, I'm just talking about my body is better than other bodies, my appearance. And you derive your self-worth from external appearance for a while, until time does something to it, as it will, unless you die first. But eventually time will erode the things that you identify with when your self-worth is derived from physical strength or physical appearance. And then eventually you shrink like an apple that you leave for too long on the kitchen counter. At first, the apple looks... and then you forget it in a corner of your kitchen counter, and then a few weeks later, it has shrunk. It's soft, it's what happened to it? Time did something to it. And it does that to your body too. So that's not a good thing to steer a sense of self-worth from, but it's very seductive, especially if you are blessed with a great body or great appearance. You have to be very careful because it's not going to last, and then you'll be very unhappy. Possessions. I have more than skills. I can do this better than other people. I have more knowledge. And then you get a heightened sense of self-worth through comparison. So you need to have a sense of self-worth. You need superiority in some area of your life to get that sense. So you have to rely on others being considered less worthy than you for your sense of self-worth. That's all to do, if you live exclusively on the horizontal dimension, that's how it works. And your sense of self-worth is very fragile, because there could always be others that, even in the area that you most identify with, there could always be others who are even better than you there, and they usually are. And the true self-worth is not comparative at all. It comes directly from the realization of the being that you are, which is precious. There's a sense of infinite worth or worthiness in there that does not depend on any comparison. It's life itself, the sacredness of life itself that you are. And success, ultimately, what is the only real success in life? It is how conscious you are, how much consciousness is manifesting, emerging, shining through you here and now. Not your historical past. Let's say that one or two of you have had a very bad life up to this point. Maybe every decision you've made has been wrong and it has led to disastrous consequences. Maybe you spent years in prison and then you got out and then you didn't succeed in that and then you suffered and so on. But now you're here. For some reason, you're here. This is an extreme case. It probably doesn't apply to any of you, but I'm just giving an example of, let's say your total life up to this point has been a disaster in the eyes of the world, or maybe even in your own eyes. But now somehow you go, and here you begin to awaken, wow, to your essence identity. That is the only true success, your consciousness, your state of consciousness. And suddenly, the whole history of you was a preparation, although it looked like a total failure, it was a preparation for this awakening. And so retrospectively, this total failure of your personal history, it all made sense. You needed it to awaken. All the suffering that were perhaps inflicted on you by others and then self-created suffering, all the suffering has brought you to the point of awakening. So retrospectively, suddenly, It was all good. It all made sense because it was obviously you needed it to awaken. That's success, not what the world tells you. And there's a deeper truth in that because you can see the seemingly bad things in your life have a purpose too. The suffering has a purpose. It is here to awaken you and to get to the point where it is no longer required. Suffering is no longer compulsory. It's optional, and if it's optional, you say, I'd rather not have it. Challenges continue to come, but they're no longer transformed into suffering. That's the difference. Challenges continue to come, but challenges will then, if you no longer transform the challenges into suffering, becoming, in other words, becoming an unhappy me, complaining and unhappy, and what then the challenges do, they just intensify the presence in you when the next challenge comes. Instead of pulling you back, they intensify the presence. And that's why you still need challenges. Life knows that. The intelligence that pervades the universe knows that, and it will give you challenges. And then, especially if you begin to drift out of presence for a while, life's getting too easy again. Okay. And then suddenly, fluck! Oh, right, okay. I forgot. Right. Okay. Oh. Oh. Okay. And what applies to an individual applies also to the collective. There is an enormous amount of suffering generated by the collective of humanity. In other words, humanity causing its own suffering through being trapped in the collective ego, through being trapped in mass psychosis, creates havoc on the planet. And then collectively, it drives humanity to a point of awakening. So you gradually then, less and less do you live through a self-image, and you're able to be yourself rather than be something else and acting something out. Be yourself. And that comes a certain simplicity and makes life so much easier when you no longer need to compare yourself to others. And all sense of inferiority disappears, but also all sense of superiority disappears. The ego cannot live without a sense of superiority, one area or another. Even if you consider yourself the greatest victim, it's a sense of superiority. So the ego needs superiority and it fears inferiority. You step out of that, superiority, inferiority become meaningless. That makes life so much easier. Also relating to other human beings becomes so much easier. So a successful life is a conscious life. And that consciousness is here now. Are you conscious now? Are you present now? Are you aware now? And then can you embody that? It doesn't matter how you got here. How you got to this awakening doesn't matter. Oh, I have another book recommendation for you. Obviously, it's a Greek philosopher. Not terribly well known. I mean, everybody's heard of Socrates or Plato or Aristotle. And this philosopher's name is Epictetus. Epictetus. I used to say Epictetus, and then I realized that the stress is on the second syllable. Epictetus. Epictetus. A great philosopher of ancient Greece. Interesting fact about these philosophers is that they came from all social classes. Social classes were, some philosophers came from a very high social class. Plato, fairly high social class. Plutarch, high social class. Epictetus was originally a slave, and eventually he was freed. And Epictetus also had a physical disability. He called himself a lame old man. So he probably had some kind of paralysis. So he learned his philosophy through suffering, through being a slave for many years, through being burdened with a physical disability, probably some kind of paralysis. And he became a great philosopher. And his philosophy is very simple. The central point of his philosophy is you're not unhappy because of events that happen, but because of what you're telling yourself about the events of your life. In other words, it is your mind that makes you unhappy, not the situation or the circumstance. How you approach the circumstance, how you interpret the circumstance determines your happiness or unhappiness. So I highly recommend discourses and selected writings, Penguin Classics. I'll give you a very brief sample of it. It's a good translation. It's contemporary language. It's almost as if he was speaking to you today rather than 2,000 years ago. This is just a little excerpt. Nothing can trouble or upset me or even seem annoying. Instead of meeting misfortune with groans and tears, I will call upon the faculty especially provided to deal with it. The faculty especially provided to deal with misfortune, so-called misfortune, is what you could call resilience, fortitude, but ultimately presence. I will call upon the faculty especially provided to deal with it. Now somebody says, but my nose is running. What do you have hands for, idiot, if not to wipe it? But how is it right that there be running noses in the first place? There must have been a dialogue between a disciple and him. But how is it right that there be running noses in the first place? Instead of thinking up protests, wouldn't it be easier just to wipe your nose? What would have become of Hercules? Hercules, the mythological figure who did the labors of Hercules, who performed incredible feats. What would have become of Hercules, do you think, if there had been no lion, no hydra, stag or boar, and no savage criminals to rid the world of, what would he have done in the absence of such challenges? Obviously, he would have just rolled over in bed and gone back to sleep. So by snoring his life away in luxury and comfort, he never would have developed into the mighty Hercules. And even if he had, what good would it have been done to him? Would it have done to him? What would have been the use of those arms, that physique, and that noble soul without crises and conditions to stir him into action? We are here to face challenges, and the challenges are here to awaken us. And we are not here to avoid challenges, to continuously seek out comfort zones.
We've had human history for the past thousands of years has been dreadful suffering. We're going to transcend. This is a transcendence of human, but this is just a question of words. It doesn't matter. What matters is that there is the birth of something entirely new on the planet. And if you wanted to explain it in words, it is the disidentification of consciousness from form. That's the end of ego, because the identification of consciousness with form is ego. It is the dream of consciousness. So when a human awakens, it's not really a human awakening, it's consciousness awakening from the dream of form. So it is not only a shift then that happens to a human being, because ultimately there's no such thing as a human being. You just look like a human being or person. You are consciousness. So it is something much vaster that's awakening. When you think you are awakening, that's what it looks like. But there's something much vaster that is awakening, of which you are a part. And that is consciousness itself. So it is a cosmic event. And since it is happening on this planet here, it is reasonable to assume, and we can be virtually certain, that because everything is a microcosm, it's happening elsewhere in the universe. So it is an awakening of the universe into a different level, a completely different level of being, of consciousness. So that's how important your life is. And that's how something that may look mundane on the surface, you go every day, you go to the office, or you go to whatever you do in your job, and every day you go and you do what you do, and you talk to people, and you deal with things every day. It looks mundane on the surface. But if you realize what really matters is the consciousness you bring to it, then what looks mundane on the surface is not mundane at all in the depths of being, because all that surface stuff is really something, an opportunity for the arising of the new consciousness through you. And so that means also that the surface of your life, which means whatever you do, where you live, or who you live with, doesn't really matter that much. What matters is what you bring in, what flows into it, the consciousness that flows through you into it. That's what matters. So you don't have to be even that concerned about what exactly it is you do. And almost anywhere, you can be the opening for that. And if consciousness, this consciousness arises through you, and you find yourself in a situation that is totally unconducive to consciousness arising, you will very quickly find yourself taken out of that situation. or you may find yourself walking out of that situation. In other words, they'll fire you, or you'll walk out. But the important thing is not to believe, okay, to bring consciousness, I can't do it in my situation. I can't do it. Something needs to shift first out there before I can. No, that's not true. You start with where you are, here and now. And if it's not right for the arising of consciousness, then something will shift in the situation. It will change through because there's now a consciousness flowing into it, or you become removed. Life removes you. So upset, again, let's go back to that term. Vigilant, it always tells you you've missed something there. You've forgotten something. And this is why the Course in Miracles has the wonderful line, I'm never upset for the reason I think. So there are many reasons why you think you're upset. He said that to me. He shouldn't have said that. He did that. He failed to do that. She did. Why can't they, these people, they never get it right. Why? I'm upset. What am I going to live on next month? What am I going to live on when I retire? My savings are shrinking. It's awful. Whatever upsets you. I'm never upset for the reason I think. And that's just something to understand deeply. There's always a reason out there why you think you're upset, but the true reason why you're upset is you're not present. You're not connected to the depths of your being. You're not there as consciousness. You're there as a little person. You're not rooted in consciousness by embodying the consciousness. You're a little person with its thoughts and reactions, and that's why you're upset. As long as you're trapped in the little personal sense of self, of course you're always upset. Even if you're not permanently upset, very soon something will happen again that will make you upset. That's why life is so frustrating in the normal state of consciousness. And that's what the Buddha called dukkha, suffering. So he used that term. Upset is a modern term. Wherever you go, you'll be miserable, said the Buddha. Just wait. It won't be long before you're miserable again. I'm paraphrasing. It's my translation of the ancient sutra. Wherever you go, you'll be unhappy. And if you're not unhappy, no, just wait a little and you'll see. And he's describing a normal state of consciousness. But he's also showing the way beyond that. But it's wonderful to, first of all, see the truth of the first statement, that wherever you think salvation lies in externals, in some other person that you meet, some other situation that you go into, some other place where you go to live, it'll be fine for a while, and then something comes in that doesn't seem quite right. Or the very thing that made you happy turns around, and the very same thing makes you unhappy. Of course, as you know, the best example of this is marrying somebody. Because when you marry somebody, at first, this person makes you happy. And then the Buddha said, just wait. Unless you transcend the merely personal, then It's not that your spouse will make you happy, no, but there is a deeper, if you want to even call it happiness, there's a deeper sense of fulfillment and satisfaction that arises from the depths of your being. And that's why then it's fine. It does mean, yes, your spouse still has his or her shortcomings, but they then exist within the larger space of consciousness. So, again, keyword, vigilance, and then experience the miracle of the transformation of consciousness, which is your sense of self is no longer derived then from the personal level, your history, your life situation, your relationships, your knowledge, your ideas, the things that people have done to you, your status in society, your possessions, which those things normally give you your sense of identity, and that changes completely.
Apply the presence to every arising challenge in your life. And challenge, the greater part of challenges, well, a large part of challenges comes through other people. You might have noticed. People can cause lots of challenges because they're so difficult to deal with. It could come through your health situation, the body, and it could come through your work situation, but is related to your financial situation. Those are the challenges that have certain external causes. So you have, on the one hand, challenges that arise just through your mind, the unobserved mind, and then others, actual challenges in your external life. But the question is, what is the state of consciousness with which you meet the arising challenges in your life? And ultimately, what your entire life is not determined by what happens to you, but by how you respond to what happens. That is, your freedom is how you respond to any event that happens to you, and your response determines further events. The important thing is that you gradually begin to realize, oh, the sound is making a strange sound. You gradually begin to realize that what until recently you called my life is ultimately something relatively insubstantial. It's a story in your mind. And then that becomes less of a burden. The entire narrative of me and my life, is then gradually, and that is part of the integration, is gradually no longer perceived as a burden, and you no longer derive your sense of who you are from the story of your life, the narrative. So Who you are is the presence now, and that's timeless and it's unconditioned. And all that remains then is memories. Of course you remember your past, but you have now a completely different relationship with your past. And ultimately, what is that when we talk of your past? Thoughts in your head is your past. And what's your future? Thoughts in your head is the future. So both past and future are experienced and cannot be experienced in any other way as thoughts in your mind. The rest is just the immediate experience of this moment. And even whenever you label whatever you experience in this moment mentally by judging it this way or that, that's also the past that is coloring the way in which you're experiencing this moment. So you have a certain relationship to whatever is arising in this moment, and you call it this or call it that. But it doesn't, there's another way of experiencing this moment, and that is accepting it as it is without the compulsive need to label it. And that's an amazing liberation. And then you are living as the deep I more and more. And you no longer get the sense that something incredibly, that you are this huge ball of problems that needs to be solved. A bit like the Gordian knot that's in Greek, I believe in ancient Greek mythology. There was this, I don't think it was even mythology, I think it's an actual historical fact. There was the Gordian knot, K-N-O-T. There was this huge thing, a rope that was tied into a huge knot. I don't know how big it was. And the challenge was to disentangle this Gordian knot, and nobody could do it. They said, oh my God. And they said, whoever can disentangle it will conquer the world. That's the story. And then a young man came. His name was Alexander, I think. And he looked at it and he drew his sword and cut through it. And so he became Alexander the Great, who conquered the known world at the time. And so the Gordian knot, I'm using this story as an analogy for the egoic self. It means you have tied yourself into a Gordian knot, me and my problems. And then you attempt to disentangle one thing after another, but while you solve one problem here, another one pops up there, and then you go there, and then, okay, I've dealt with this now. That work problem is solved, the finances are working again, that's great. And then suddenly your spouse goes off with someone else. Or suddenly you have a pain here. To go. Life never leaves you alone for very long. But the main thing is that this entity that the Buddha calls the self, it doesn't take time to transcend it, because you would have to some extent, psychoanalysis tries to solve the problem of you. And although there is something to be said for occasionally looking at certain things in your past, but your main area, your main focus needs to remain the present moment, except ways when you might suddenly discover why it is that every time somebody makes you wait, you become extremely upset and angry, far beyond what would be warranted by this particular situation. And suddenly you may remember, as you become more conscious of your emotions, that perhaps when you were a child, who knows, your dad abandoned you and the family when you were very young, and this sense of abandonment comes over you even when you're waiting for somebody and somebody arrives late. You overreact totally because there's a heavy pain body associated with the idea of abandonment. And this has been unconscious, and suddenly as you bring more presence, you become more aware of that emotion that arises. Instead of being it, you're the awareness that sees the arising of the emotion. And then it sometimes happens that when you clearly see the arising of an emotion, you may suddenly also remember where it started. You may, or you may not. It could be helpful if you remember where it started, but it's not an absolute necessity, because it could have started in another life.